With no sports on, a lot of people have been tuning in to watch the ESPN documentary series about the last year of Michael Jordan's basketball career, The Last Dance. And people have been watching it because Michael Jordan was a winner. It was almost as if throughout the entire 90s, in the 6 championships that Michael Jordan and his team, the Chicago Bulls, won, that they could not lose. I remember just as a kid watching those games, and he was incredible, so much better than everyone else. He almost willed single-handedly his team to victory. If you had Michael Jordan on your team, you didn't lose. See, when you have the right person on your team, you're going to win. Because there are some people so great in their sports or on your business team or in life, they're so great that when you have them on your team, you're going to win. The same is true even more so exponentially when it comes to Jesus. Because when Jesus is on your team, you're going to win. When Jesus is on your team, you're going to win. In 1 Peter chapter 3, we read in verse 19, after being made alive, so after Jesus died and after he rose from the dead 3 days later, it says, he went and made proclamation to the imprisoned spirits, to those who were disobedient long ago. Okay, now this is bizarre. I'm going to admit that this passage of 1 Peter is one of the hardest to interpret in the entire book. In fact, some people think it's one of the hardest passages to interpret in the entire New Testament. So I'm going to give you my best stab at what it says. Based on biblical scholars, it seems that the spirits that Peter is talking about are not the spirits imprisoned in hell. That is a very common and traditional view held throughout the church, that Jesus, after he died and before he ascended into heaven, he proclaimed to the dead that he went to hell to announce that he had conquered over death and sin. But actually, it seems that the word spirits here is referring to not human spirits, but spiritual beings. In fact, this language is used in some of the Jewish writings that aren't in the Bible from the first century and that time period. Like books like, if you've ever heard of it, the book of Enoch, which is not in the Bible. See, in those books, it tells about the Jewish mindset of how the world and the universe worked, and they had this idea that there were multiple levels of heaven. Paul even talks about that in 1 Corinthians. And the idea was that there's the first heaven, which is like the earth's atmosphere, the second heaven, which was the outer space, and then the third heaven where God resided. But it was believed that that second heaven was basically out there in the atmosphere, beyond the atmosphere in the universe, and it was there that the spiritual beings resided when they weren't here on earth. So there's this idea that it seems, and once again I'm saying this is very a loose interpretation because it's a very challenging passage to figure out, but it seems that when Jesus ascended to the highest heaven, the third heaven, that he passed through that heaven, and of course this isn't heaven as in the place where God resides, this is the spiritual realm, that Jesus passed through that, and when he was passing through that, he proclaimed to the spiritual beings, the angels and the demons who had been disobedient, that God had conquered over death and over sin. This was the announcement that victory was coming and that victory had already been accomplished. And then he ascended into heaven. He goes on to say, God waited patiently in the days of Noah while the ark was being built. In it, only a few people, 8 in all, were saved through water, and this water symbolizes baptism that now saves you also. Not the removal of dirt from the body, but the pledge of a clear conscience toward God. It saves you by the resurrection of Jesus Christ, who has gone into heaven and is at God's right hand with angels, authorities, and powers in submission to him. So once again, very difficult to interpret. But it seems that Peter's alluding to Noah's ark, that even though the whole world was destroyed, those who got in the ark with Noah were saved from the flood and the destruction. In the same way, those of us who put our faith in Jesus, who become part of him and put our faith in him, we are saved from the destruction that we rightfully deserve because of our sin. That hell is taken away, that destruction of everything, the judgment that will come justly because of sin. We are saved from that in the same way that Noah's family was saved from the flood. And Jesus has this victory. He proclaims this victory even to demons. Why? Because he died and rose from the dead by the power of God. See, Jesus won. It even says that he has all angels, authorities, and powers in submission to him. See, Jesus has all powerful. He is the most powerful being in the entire universe. All things are subject to him on earth and in heaven and on even under the earth. All things are subject to the King of Kings. And Jesus, with all power, sitting on the throne right now, is on your side. And if Jesus is on your team, you're on the winning team. With Jesus on your team, you're on the winning team. Okay, even way more than Michael Jordan or the best athlete you can imagine. When Jesus is on your team, you're on the winning team. So whatever you're facing right now, the struggle, the depression, the anxiety, the worry, the loss of job, the unemployment, the fear, all of it, Jesus can conquer because He has already conquered the grave. With Jesus on your team, you're on the winning team.